That time you killed me because inventing time travel did not make us better persons. This is a game for two players only. Players take on the role of time traveling scientists who must be each other's arch nemesis because all that they're trying to do in the game is to kill each other, to kill as many copies of each other across time as possible. The game clearly borrows from classic games such as checkers or chess, as you can see from the boards. I place them next to each other, but it's important to understand that these are three separate boards. They represent the same area, actually, the same physical space in three different times: the past, the present, and the future. And so those pieces that you see there, they all represent the same individual acting in different times and forming copies of themselves. Each player also has a limited pool of game pieces that you can use when you're making copies of yourself in time. Then you can add those to the play area. But when copies of yourself are removed, that is, they're killed, then they don't go back to your supply, they're out of the game, so your supply is likely going to become narrower as the game progresses, which is, well, precisely the point. Removing the possibility of bringing in new copies is one way of increasing one's chances of victory. Although victory is not predicated on elimination per se. Rather, elimination of enemy pieces may help you get there. So how do you win? If at the end of your turn, the opponent is absent from at least two timelines, then you win the game. Meaning, if there are at least two boards where there aren't any pieces of the opponent, then you win the game. So if this is the end of the black player's turn, and white is only in one space or no spaces, then white is absent from at least two areas, then black wins the game. And that's the idea. And again, if the opponent doesn't have many game pieces available, that is more likely, of course. But also, just bringing everybody in for the sake of it is not necessarily a good idea. Things can get crowded, and that's not always good. Now, keeping track of all of the copies of yourself across time can be complicated, and that's why you have a token that indicates where you're paying attention right now. So there's only one of the three areas in which you can act on any given turn. So players will alternate taking turns, and the active player can only activate one copy of themselves in the area indicated by that token. At the beginning of the game, players only have one game piece per era, but later it may be more. So right now, for example, if I am white and I'm activating there, and I must activate somebody in that timeline, I have to decide which one I'll activate, and that game piece will take 2 actions, and the other game piece or pieces I have there will take 0 actions. As an action, you can move one space orthogonally within the same timeline. Pretty simple. Now, when you move, if you are moving in a space containing an enemy piece, you push them, so there will be one move. And if you push them against a wall, squash, then they are eliminated. That's actually one of the most common ways of killing enemy pieces. By the way, sometimes I say eliminating as I describe the game to you. The rulebook insists on this sort of dark humor. They constantly talk about murder, and more murder. So one way of murdering enemy pieces is to squish them against the wall, and that removes them from the game. Another way is to create a paradox. If you can push one game piece against a copy of itself, they freak out by being hacked by themselves, and they're both eliminated. There will be other ways of eliminating game pieces, but that's a good intro to this lovely topic. For an action, you can also move to an empty space in the future, in which case you simply go there, and it has to be the next timeline. So from the past to the present to the future, you can just skip. So suppose that piece activates, and I go 1, and then that space is labeled 10, and 2. That completes the activate of that piece, the activation of that piece. When you travel forward in time, you just do that. Nothing else happens. When you travel back in time, you create copies of yourself. Basically, you leave behind an identical copy. So from here, I'm going there. I'm leaving behind a copy there in the space where I was, and I travel there. Again, the destination space needs to be empty for me to be able to do so. And that is possible only, of course, if I have remaining pieces in my supply, which means if all of your pieces in your supply have been eliminated or just don't have any more available, then you cannot travel back in time, and that can be really problematic. So that's the general idea. You're moving around back and forth, pushing each other, and again, trying to eliminate enemy pieces from at least 2 timelines. After you take your 2 actions, and you must take them if you're allowed to, you take this token and you must move it to a different timeline. You cannot keep it there. So basically, if you're setting up an action there, then you will be forced to take an action somewhere else and then go back there, which means the opponent also may have a chance to respond. But you often have the feeling that you're just 1 turn behind anything that you want to do, 1 action behind everything that you want to do. What I showed you are the basic rules of the game, which I think of as the prologue, as the introduction to the game. Because the game actually comes in 4 variants or 4 chapters that that present unique components. They come in these boxes, and the game makes a big deal about the fact that you shouldn't open them until you're instructed to. And so you play chapter 1, then chapter 2, 3, and 4. And also the rule says do not read the rules for the next chapter. So I'm going to avoid spoilers. I'm not going to show you what they do because I don't want you then to lose the enjoyment of discovering these things. This being said, this is not a legacy game. This is not an RPG. These chapters, you play them in order, but they don't really create much of a story. I think that if we switch some of these, the story would remain the same. So just to be clear, I think that if this game had been released 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it would have been released as, hey, these are the basic rules, and these are some variants, include those game components, or those. But these days, we have the idea of locking components inside envelopes or boxes, and then we have the magic of storytelling that emerges. So because of that, I cannot show you these components and tell you about those game modes, which again, I don't think really add much in terms of story. I think they would have been perfectly acceptable to be discussed in a review 10 years ago. But I don't have a time machine to go back to 10 years ago. And if I did, probably somebody would be there waiting for me to squish me against a wall and murder me, because that's what the game has taught me. So, cannot tell you what you find in those game variants. I can tell you that they are good-looking components of sturdy plastic. I really like the way the board looks when you add those components and when you add those extra rules. And they're just different things, of course, to set up traps with, to murder each other, to things that you can exploit unless the opponent exploits them. Before you do. And you can also imagine there will be some time effects there because it's time traveling. So maybe a component will have different versions of themselves, just like the people do, so that they represent how different they behave or interact in different moments in time. Though I cannot show you those, but they do add, yes, quite a bit, and they do keep the game fresh. They make the game playable in very different ways. Honest, the basic game, the prologue to the saga, the 4-chapter saga, it's almost good enough. Frankly, I played this game to introduce the game to my kids. Those are the people I played it with. My kids are now 10 and 12. I played with them, and with both of them, first I just played the game as is, nothing else, just the basic rules that I showed you. And it was fun enough. As a light entertainment, they're still fun to see how I thought I figured it all out until a player moves 1 and then travels back in time, and then next time they kill me. And yes, it seems obvious, but the fact that, of course, you had to think of this space as adjacent, this space basically is almost adjacent to this one. No, wait a second. This space is adjacent to this one, for example. So it can definitely be that you think you're looking at a thing and the enemy comes out of nowhere and squishes you against the wall, which makes perfect sense thematically, time traveling ambushes. It's almost good enough as a light abstract strategy game. When you add those other components, you have more modes of play, more complexity. Some of those are hilarious. There's definitely a dark humor that ranges across time. There were times where I was just laughing and I was killed in a particularly ridiculous and cartoonish way by one of those components. And it worked very well. I lost the game, but hey, I had fun doing it. So that's also something that is good in modern game culture, that we have a good time even when we lose. It's fun. It's a fun game with, again, at least a number of sets of components. What's in those boxes, then maybe there will be even more modes unlocked. I don't know, but you're definitely going to find a lot of play variants around this very simple, very basic script. The lock components will give you a lot of variety, a lot of different situations, very good production value. So I cannot tell you much about this because the rulebook says that's secret stuff and those components are in boxes, and I respect that that's how the publisher wanted to present the game, so I have to be vague, but I can tell you every variant of The Time You Kill Me I played, including the basic one, was fun. I had a good time. I don't know about game night. Yeah, for some of the variants, even playing with some of my more hardcore gaming friends, or even just the base game as a filler, that works perfectly well. Game night 2P only games, so they don't necessarily work so well. 2-player games, 2 players only games work very well with play with your spouse situations. Of course, in that situation, you don't always want games that are this confrontation. So there is that. If you and your spouse do not mind very, very confrontational games, killing the opponent is all you're supposed to be doing in this game, is all that you want to do in this game. Well, if you and your spouse don't mind confrontational games of this kind, then this could be another option, another context, another situation in which That Time You Kill Me would work well.